Tony Blair seemed at his most uncomfortable with that. If there was one point during the day when he seemed to slightly falter, would you agree?
Well, I would agree, but I think one has to look in great detail at what he's saying. It was very complicated, that part of the proceedings, and at times very difficult to follow. And Blair would hold up the resolution, particularly 1441, and say, read the resolution. But he would misquote, or rather only partially quote from it. He claimed that that resolution gives the UK sufficient authority for the use of force. But in fact, when that resolution was presented and sold to the Security Council, it was sold as the last chance for peace. It was not sold as authority for war. Blair claimed today that the operative paragraph 4 gave the UK material breach, the right to use force if inspections were not properly complied with. But that's not what operative 4 says. It in fact says that such an assessment needs to be reported back to the Council for the Council to make its own view. In other words, there needs to be another resolution. And Blair actually misled the inquiry on that point. I'm very disappointed that the inquiry didn't itself take up 1441. Why didn't they have copies of the resolution in front of them and come back to him on this very important point?
Yeah, interesting that the point made was almost between whether it was crucial or whether it was favourable, and how that argument had shifted from Lord Goldsmith.
Well, I think the British argument on the legality, or the Blair argument on the legality, is fundamentally undermined by the fact that the UK went back to the Security Council for a second authorising resolution and didn't get it. You don't go to the Security Council for resolutions for fun. You go there because you need them. Secondly, this whole argument, which was covered in some detail but not really in sufficient depth, about the so-called revival argument, which is what the Blair-Goldsmith line fundamentally relies on, that you're relying on authority given by the Council, by the Security Council in 1990, 12 years before, for a completely different circumstance, when Iraq was invading Kuwait, was an occupation of Kuwait, for the authority to go to war. It is spurious, to say the least, to claim that as legal authority for a war in completely different circumstances 12 years later. Nobody, except maybe Bush's lawyers in Washington, believes that argument. No serious international lawyer. The Foreign Office's own legal advisers did not accept that argument. And again, the panel really failed to press this point home.
Carne, I don't know if you were listening in to the programme previously. We were talking to Reg Keys, who said that Tony Blair had really missed an opportunity not to express his regret. In terms of the way he handled today, if you're sort of stepping back and looking at the big picture, there wasn't any sense of regret from him, certainly no apology, but he threw forward, really, and said what he'd done should be looked at with pride and achievement. What did you make of the overall demeanour?
Well, it was a very sophisticated and detailed presentation, but in a sense I felt there was so much detail there, it was actually very hard for a layman to find their way through it. I found many fundamental holes in the argument, the stuff about the threat, his emphasis on the 45 minutes, still extraordinary. I mean, it's an extraordinary claim to say that he still believes that, not because of what has happened subsequently, but because at the time that evidence was completely aberrational from the JIC, the general assessment of the British government, that Iraq did not present a consistent threat. And again, the panel failed to get into that, failed to dig under that claim and see what was underneath it.
So Carne, would you say that today has left you with more questions still unanswered than it solved, or do you think we have gleaned new things today?
No, I didn't feel there was anything substantially new. There was a lot of detail, a lot of he said, she said, and I spoke to so-and-so then, but I'm afraid the panel is still skating over the surface. One issue that's not been discussed at all today was an ideal opportunity to bring it up. Why was there no proper cabinet discussion of alternatives to war? There were proper policy alternatives to war. I worked on them. I had recommended them to ministers. These were not discussed by the cabinet. They were not presented to cabinet ministers. Blair himself doesn't appear to have considered them. Why was that? Why is the panel not asking about this? I'm left very frustrated.
I guess the point is that we haven't yet come to the end. This is part of a process, and we'll see what the panel will make of this only at the very end when that inquiry is written up. Do you think that they will, I don't know, throw forward to a new era of the way politicians and the public deal with each other?
I think that's a very interesting question. I mean, this is an unusual and perhaps even unprecedented process of a former Prime Minister being questioned in this way. I personally would have liked to have seen it done in a much more intrusive, adversarial manner to try to get to the real truth underneath it, rather than just giving Blair a really very comfortable chance to just tell his version of events. But I do think events like this, wars which have clearly been taken on a very questionable basis, conducted in a rather incompetent fashion, do breach the fundamental trust between public and government. Whether this inquiry will help restore that trust, I rather wonder.
Carne Ross in New York, the UN headquarters. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
I'm joined now by